our next guest is Cliff and Helen Beaumont, who are going to give some interesting information about medieval reenactment.
Hi folks. What I'm going to start talking about first of all is the difference between how people fought in medieval times and what we do now in reenactment, which has to be adjusted because we actually don't want to lock each other's livings on. What we'll do is we'll start off with looking at the armour and weapons used in medieval reenactment and in medieval times and look at the difference. Now, everyone's familiar with the longsword. The ones we use in reenactment are blunted, but even in itself, the blunt weapon is authentic, because in tournament, knights would use blunted weapons, or if they didn't have an alternative blunt weapon, they would use sheaths on either side to protect the blade. Because in the early days of tournaments, knights would sustain quite serious injuries, and that's all very well for the crowd, but when the king needs a knight to go out to fight, they don't want them incapacitated because they've been having too much fun. So the longsword, this version is circa, I would say, 1350, right up to the end of the Wars of the Roses, 1485. So, and the big difference is the swords are now starting to get smaller because of the transition between mail and armour. Now, quite a few Victorian myths, as it were, about knights and armour. Victorian words such as chainmail are now in our vocabulary, which to a reenactor is not a good word. It's mail. It's actually all armour is referred to as harness. And you either have plate harness or mail harness. And mail in itself was very good defence against a sword. It's an intricate pattern of rings knitted together. So I'll pass that along so you can have a look at that. That's done with, we use galvanised rings there, which is a good modern equivalent to what we use. And then you would protect your head with something like this. I'll put this going the other way. This is a male coif or balaclava. You wear a padded arming cap on it underneath for two reasons. One is because this in itself will protect you from blow. It will protect you from being cut. But what the padded arming cap underneath would do was actually dissipate the impact over the skull. So hopefully it wouldn't, you wouldn't receive a crushed skull if you were glancing through. And so if I pass this one going the other way, this one here weighs 14 pounds because we had it weighed. And as my wife Helen will tell you later on about what we do with film work and the differences between what they do in film work and what we can do. So, the transition between mail and armour. The Victorians said that knights would be winched up on an A-frame and the horse would be brought in underneath, and then they'd lower the knight down, and that's how they go into battle. This is totally untrue. There's only one documented case of a knight being winched onto horseback in full-plate armour, and that was Henry VIII. And the only reason why he had to be done that way was because he had such bad gout in later years he couldn't actually mount a horse unaided. So the easiest way was to get some poor sod to winch him up in his armour. I would imagine it would be a pretty poor sod actually to pull him up and sit him on his horse. They also said that once a knight was downed in battle, he wouldn't be able to get up again. This is totally untrue. If you could imagine that knights of the day were fed on the best food, they were trained from children, they were really the Olympic athletes of their day. Now I'm middle-aged and quite overweight. I wear somewhere between 5 and 7 stone of armour, depending on whether or not I'm wearing a battle breastplate. And if I fall over, I have no problems whatsoever getting up again. We have a good friend of ours who was very fit and able, and he always used to do a trick of doing cartwheels in armour. So it's always a trade-off between protection and maneuverability. So, what mail is very good at is if you get sliced with a sword, that's a very good protection. But what it's not good against is a crushing blow. A crushing blow against the body will do just as much damage through mail. As you can see, one of my wife's weapons here, she's very enthusiastic when she gets into the field.
Yes.
Oh.
It was straight.
It was straight when she first had it. But you can imagine a crushing blow will actually, that will do quite a lot of damage. And medieval knights that were cap-a-pied or head to toe in mail, the actual opponent would not try to cut your arms and legs off, he would actually try to beat you to death inside your armour by bursting the internal organs. So that's what they would do. So started off by having small plates, vanguards, rear guards, and greaves to protect against it, and then someone had the bright idea of connecting them all up together. So then we start getting the full plate armour. This would be worn circa 1415. My character, this is my armour, and my character is Sir Thomas Beaufort, Duke of Exeter, who fought alongside Henry V. So that's the sort of armour he would be wearing. They would wear, I don't, but they would also wear an arming, I wear an arming jack, but on their arming jack they would stitch mail just here and also in here. But I tried that, and you would not believe how that chaps. So because my life doesn't depend on it, I don't use it. So the target areas in medieval times. First and foremost, a medieval knight would attack the head, obviously, the neck, going in towards the jugular, the collarbone. Once that collarbone is broken, that holds the whole frame of the armour. And you'll see people that break, first aiders amongst you will know that if someone's broken their collarbone, a quite good symptom of someone with a broken collarbone is they'll do that. And it's because they're actually supporting the weight of the shoulder, which gives them ease from pain. Once that bone is broken, the whole thing drops. They would go for the arm joints. It doesn't take many, I think it's about 50 to 60 pounds per square inch of pressure will irreparably damage your elbow or knee joint. It will be inoperable. The only thing they could do is fuse it after that. A sword blade, when we're in full contact, goes around 150 feet per second, delivering a blow of somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds per square inch when it contacts. So a blow there would shatter his elbow. We also go for the knee joints and also the family jewels. Mostly wearing breastplates, so it's not an idea to go for the breast. As you can see, the swords now, in Saxon times, the swords were very heavy, tip-ended weapons that would be used for bludgeoning more than anything else. The long sword now, tapering, thinner, is because it's becoming more of a thrusting weapon. A very, very favourite killing blow for a knight would be, as the knight comes in and raises his arm to attack you, you thrust into the armpit and in through the rib cage, twist, pull it out. And it would suck as well. There's been documented cases of knights going down and actually putting their feet on the body and sucking it out again. People call this blood channels in the sword, and yes, it is a blood channel, but it's also a way that the sword was made. The sword was made by iron and steel being woven together in a bar and then hammered flat into two pieces, and then the bit in the middle would be filled, and that's why it's called a fuller, because it's filling. It also makes the sword quite light. One of the things that Hollywood do is they see these knights, whoa, with a sword, and if you're wearing 7 stone of armour, the last thing you want is a 7 stone sword as well. Most of the swords, it's not too bad, balances within 6 inches of the quillions. It weighs about 2.5 to 3 pounds, depending on personal preference. It's very difficult to say what knights would actually use and wear, because it's a bit like someone from the 28th century coming back and saying, oh, 20th century people all wore t-shirt and jeans, because we don't. And so the personal preference of the knight would be involved, what sort of armour they would use would be involved. The state of my armour is very authentic. It's been polished and cleaned, but it still has rust on it. And that was because they would clean it with sand and vinegar, especially mail. Mail would be put in a sack or a barrel and rolled around to try and get all the rust off it. But it would look very much like this. It wouldn't be gleaming unless they were going to tournament. And then you beat those squares vigorously for a few days to make sure that they got it nice and shiny for you. The dents would all be knocked out, so you look in pristine condition. So this would be sort of typical armour of a knight, say, I would probably say early on in campaign, because he's got a few dents and knocks in there, but the rust is not too bad. But getting towards the end of it, it would be quite a state. They would try and keep it down as much as possible. At least they haven't got the things that they got today. Gloves, fully articulated. They're absolutely very, very comfortable to wear. And they've got the big hourglass on it, typical of my period, so I can actually move my arm around. Difference between this and medieval gauntlet is because the lack of gabions. Gabions were worn on the knuckles, they could be points. The King of England actually preferred little lions, isn't that cute? And basically the idea was that if you got in close to a knight, you punch him with it. And it's got great big knuckle dusters on the end of it. But of course in reenactment that would be far too dangerous, so we abused them.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
You won't let me have them.
So, to make it look as authentic as we possibly can, we do a different style of fighting that's as close to what we can as possible. We use 5 areas of attack, with Gary again. The head can be attacked, but normally in a straight down action, hitting the top of the head. That's normally because we are wearing decent steel quality helm. It's a nice bassinet from around the period. Padded arming cap underneath. So if you hit someone on the top of the head, you'll feel it. It'll make your teeth rattle if they hit you particularly hard. But it's just as, not as even as much. I've done boxing when I was a kid, but it's not as hard as that. So you still go for the head. We always try and strike in a downward motion when we're fighting, and the sword is at an angle. This is because if anything goes wrong while we're fighting, then the sword is only travelling in one direction, and that's down towards the ground. So if I miss the shot, it just goes, it grounds itself. The areas I'm attacking, the bicep, and again, I'm trying to hit the armour to glance down the armour and away. Exactly the same here. We go for the 5, like so, and in extreme cases, if I can get down there, I'll go for the shin plates. We don't choreograph our fights. Helen will explain later why we don't choreograph our fights. We try to learn as much as possible about the way knights fall, changing the target areas, but giving the illusion of a medieval fight. The different types of swords, different types of swords. This ordinary longsword, and as the transition between mail and plate came again, you then got what we call bastard sword, which is basically a hand and a half, and the reason why there's a hand and a half breadth on the grip, and that's so that when you're wearing gloves, the gauntlets, it gives you enough room to accommodate your grip. You can actually get it really close. The sword in itself is a multiple faceted weapon. You can thrust with it, you can slash with it, you can bring it up the other way, use the quillions, use it like an axe, go straight through the helmet with it. You can punch with it, defend with it, all sorts of things. Very, very versatile weapon. I think that's why it was a weapon of choice for the knight. It's also a symbol of status as well. these. It's a dagger. You know, little daggers that people hold up people in subways with today. Sometimes I feel a bit like Crocodile Dundee. You know, when they say, oh, what you got there? That's a knife. You say, nah, that's a knife. Normally carried in the left hand. Fight with one, with the other if you've got a shield. But an archer would use this in an entirely different way. Normal times, they believed that to spare the rod spoilt the child. So from around 6 or 7, a lad would be sent to a different castle, probably a relative, and learn to be a page. He'd learn to serve at table, and he'd have to do long, long hours at 6 or 7. At 7 or 8, he would become a squire, starting off at the very bottom, learning to look after horses, learning how to look after stables, learning to fight. Starting off with wooden weapons, moving up to metal weapons. Their first suit of armour would normally be around the age of 11 or 12, and they would be twice as heavy as their battle armour. And that is so that as boys develop into men, they would grow muscles in the right places, and also that when they actually went into fight, when they put their battle armour on, they'd think, God, this feels really light. And yet to a normal person, you think, oh. To be honest, once, you know, if you think that a modern infantryman carries about 6 stone on his back quite easily, in a rucksack, in a burden, we carry the same in medieval armour, but it's spread evenly throughout the body. It's carrying a bag, or bring a bag of armour in this afternoon, I'm like, oh God, this weighs a ton. And yet when I'm wearing it, I'm so used to it, it just doesn't bother me until it gets hot. And then they call it the soldier's oven. And boy, do you know it. I think Barclay the other year, not this year because it was under water, but the other year it was, what, 35 degrees on the battlefield? And we were pumping water in this as fast as we could, and it was coming out as fast as we could. And soldiers over time would faint through sheer heat exhaustion. Being pressed as well would be quite a dangerous thing. And as you call the Duke of York, when they found him, didn't have a mark on his body. And that was because he'd been buried under the bodies of his opponents and suffocated. We've actually been there, and we've been there when it's raining. And the ground, the earth near there is very, very fine. And once it starts to get wet, it starts to get the consistency of ready bread. So if you fall face down in it and then someone stands on the back of your head, you will drown in this stuff quite easily. It'll be a horrible way to go. They said that the bodies were piled so high that archers were running up the piles of body and pulling knights off their horses because they got such a run onto it. But Gary, if I can borrow you again. So I'm a peasant. I've learnt from about the age of 7 or 8 again to fire a longbow. But apart from that, I use pitchfork, wherever I can lay my hands on, especially the French. The French weren't allowed to have weapons, big mistake. But the law still says, actually, today, that on a Sunday after church, if you're up to about the age of 65, 78, you're supposed to be practicing for archery. And the law still says that if you get between an archer and his butt on a Sunday afternoon, and you catch an arrow, tough. The law still says that on a Sunday, if you kill a Welshman in the grounds of Shrewsbury Abbey, that's absolutely fine. In fact, you can claim a boon off the church, which is great.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby. If you're unemployed, want to supplement your wages a bit, do that. But what you had really with a knight was a medieval tank. He was the best of his type in the day. And the last thing you want to do is get at sword's length to a knight if you're a peasant, because he will chop you to pieces. So what an archer would do when they run out of arrows, they would then start to jump and pull knights off their horses. Now the French hated this because they felt that medieval warfare should be an honourable thing between knights. Henry V, on the other hand, said, if I've got an Englishman with me, if you can pull a froggy off his horse and kill him, good on you. I don't care if you're the lowliest peasant or highest peasant, do it. And they really notice this. So what would you do against a man in full plate armour? Well, what you would do, stand aside, is you get close up to him so he can't use his sword, hug him, and stab him. And what you're aiming for actually is the femoral artery in the groin. If you stab someone in the femoral artery, you would probably kill them under a minute. You bleed to death. You shoot blood so many feet into the air. It's under such high pressure. However, if you miss the femoral artery and snag a spud instead, that will ruin his day. And if you can imagine that sort of blade going into about that far up inside the body cavity, that is going to do some serious damage. Thank you, Gary. Thank you. A lot of the weapons being used were basically someone riding around one day and seeing an everyday implement and thinking that would be good on the battlefield. There's some bloodthirsty person at one point. This is a knight's axe. Very, very different to a chopping wood axe. A chopping wood axe would have a much broader blade. The reason why it's got a long shaft and a short blade is all about pressure and area of impact. What this is basically is a cannon gun. If I hit someone in the breastplate full on, the leverage from the amount of handle I've got there and the small area of impact will punch straight through a breastplate. And that's what I want to do. Or better still, the other very nice thing is a German. Why do the Germans always come up with these vicious things? This is a German scorpion. This is a German scorpion. This is a reenactment version of it. When I tell you how the real one looks, you'll probably realise why it's different. The real one would have had barbed hooks on the end of each chain. There are very few of us in reenactment that use flails or mason chain because they are, all the weapons I've used, they are probably the most unpredictable. They are just as likely to fly back and hit you in the face as they are to damage your opponent. They didn't know much about, well, it's a lot of conjecture about how much they knew about medical science in medieval times. But one thing they did know was that if before battle I found a nice pile of horse poo, and I would drag the barbed hooks through it and go into battle with it. Same as the archers would actually coat the end of their arrows or bodkins with horse dung if they could. And it'd certainly stick them in the ground. Two reasons why they would stick them in the ground. One, it's easier than trying to get them out of a quiver, sorry, yeah, mine went blank, out of a quiver, but also, and they said that a good archer could fire 10 arrows a minute. And that at any one time, there would be 3 in the air. One hitting the target, one on its way, one just leaving the bow. Accuracy was very good in those days. But to be honest, if you've got 30,000 Frenchmen riding towards you, you fire into you're going to hit something. So basically, when the order to loose was given, not fire, you see it in Hollywood, sometimes they shout fire, and it just goes, it's loose. So they would grab it, draw, loose, and they would literally be that sort of motion. They would, apparently the skeletons found of many archers would have very exaggerated shoulder muscles to gather that. Reenactment today, we use draw weights of somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds. I'm not an archer, so don't quote me on this, but it's about 30 to 40 pounds with a blunted end. They reckon, and there's a lot of argument about this as well, that the longbows used in medieval times had a draw weight somewhere between 120 and 180 pounds. But some on the Mary Rose were found to have around 250 pound draw weight, but they think they were naval bows. Now the difference between the two is that an archer would straight arm, put it back to the ear, fire. A naval bow, they would actually... I stopped fire then, didn't I? Yeah. A naval bow, they would sit on the floor, have the bow around their feet, put the arrow between them, pull it back, and let it go. That's why they think that some of the bows there were around 250 draw weight, because that's how they were using them. Although, again, there was no one there, so we don't know. However, Henry VIII always complained that archers weren't as good as they were in his grandfather's day. So, you had a look at all the weapons here. One last one I can show you is a short sword. I wondered why they had short swords, and then the first time I fought in line in a battle, I realised why they had short swords. You can't wave a long sword around when you're in amongst loads of people. So the first thing you do is you draw your sword back and smack the guy in the head behind you. So this is very much in a Roman style to thrust. Thrust at your opponent, try and get gaps in the armour. As the centuries went on, the shields got smaller and smaller because the armour got better and better, and eventually they disappeared. So the fighting style of standing here toe to toe and wading in at each other changed. And it changed to something that is known as, and records survive today, as the Tollhof style. And it's a very, very different way of fighting. Personally, I hate it. I prefer the earlier version when you just stand and batter with the Jesus out of each other. The Tollhof style, very much in this sort of way, standing at that angle, using the end of the sword. The swords would be much longer. They would have another quillion down here somewhere. So they'd actually mix it up like this, and then get in and then swing, if they could, bringing the sword down like so, again using it as a weapon. But standing very much in this sort of pose, or that sort of pose, as opposed to square on. The reason why is because without the shield, there's no point in standing. You stand square on like this when you've got a shield. There's no point in standing like that anymore if you haven't got a shield. So you stand back like so. Very, very difficult. I've tried Tollhof, and because I've learnt right from the beginning to use a sword like this, it's so alien that I find it very difficult. But each to their own, I suppose. I think it would be a disservice to talk about swords without talking about the greatest sword maker, in my opinion, the greatest sword makers in the world. And that's the Japanese. The katana, beautifully made sword. This is a reproduction. I couldn't afford a real one. Again, sword used in a totally different style because it's a totally different style of fighting. But Helen, if you want to show the style of fighting, did you want to show the style of fighting?
I don't actually fight.
Yeah.
I fight more of a Japanese style than I do actually know.
More two-handed, more forward, more with it over the head. Also, I suppose, if you look at the Star Wars film, the way they fight with the lightsabers is more of a Japanese style than it is a modern, than a medieval European style, standing back like so in this sort of pose, up like this in that sort of pose. Very much a slashing way of fighting. Again, when we reenact fighting, we differ from how they would have fought in medieval times and how they would have fought, the Japanese would have fought. Because if you saw two Japanese samurai fighting as reenactment, it would probably be extremely boring. Because they would probably stand there for a good 10 or 15 minutes just looking at each other, waiting for one to blink first before they actually made their move. And that may be a great fighting style, but to watch it as a member of the public, you like watching paint dry. Again, beautiful, beautiful swords. The swords we use were not half as good, I don't think, in Europe. They were designed for a totally different thing. But again, Hollywood would have its way, and when we reenact, you will see us blocking with our blades, hitting with our blades. A medieval knight, if you could come forward and watch us reenact what they do, but the last thing you wanted to do is touch blade on blade with another sword because you just blunt it. And because the steel is not half as good as the katana steel, it wouldn't take very long to take great big chunks. You can see this here is the M45 strong steel. It's still got great big chunks taken out of it where I'll hit other people's blades. They would defend with the sword. You'd actually try and go for the armour or gaps in the armour or thrust with it. But you would, again, it would be very much like two dogs circling each other, trying to find the best way, waiting for one person to stand the wrong way or trip over something and get in there to make that kill. That's how they used to fight. If I've made some mistakes and you've read something different, I apologise. The lovely thing about history is that no one gets a PhD unless they take someone's theory and rip it apart in their own dissertation. So for as many things as I've read, there will be many different opinions. Sometimes the ages of which people started their fighting, especially with bow and sword, vary from book to book. What I try to do is read as many different versions of it as possible and give you a mean average. So there might be some of you out there saying, rubbish, they didn't start using a long bow or fighting with a sword to at least 40. But that's because you've read some of those, and it may be that there are some archers out there, and if there are archers out there, I humbly apologise, I've probably got lots of it wrong. But I try to get it as accurate as I can in a generalised way. But the one thing I do know about archers is they were horrible to knights. They would, as all of you know, is where this comes from. If you were caught by the French, they would cut not only these two fingers off, but later on they'd actually cut the other two off as well. Because archers were very good at saying, okay, well, you cut these two fingers off, so they're fight the other hand, shoot with the other hand. So, they would have the cloth-yard shaft. No one really knows if there was a cloth-yard shaft. I think it may be that there was a measurement used for when ordering large mounts of arrows. But from what I can gather from archers, they tend to use different lengths of shafts depending on your own arm length and the person using it. One thing I do know is that the little tykes used to put their bodkins on with candle wax, so that when it entered you, and the poor barber surgeon who had just finished lancing a boil and so on said, okay, I'll be there in a minute, he would then try to pull the shaft out, and when he did, he'd leave the bodkin behind his own fixed on the candle wax, so then he's got to go rooting around inside the wound to try and find it. I saw a fantastic documentary on how they actually got the bodkin out of young Prince Henry, who was become later Henry V. At the Battle of Shrewsbury, he caught an arrow just here. The arrow went through the skull and lodged itself at the back of the skull here. And they had to pull the shaft out, leaving the bodkin behind. And the surgeon then at this time developed almost like what looked like a pincer that went down into the wound. And then when they screwed it, it opened up inside the bodkin and they were able to gradually ease it out. And they said that the young prince never made a sound. And for that, I take my hat off to him because I was screaming at the right there. It took at least several nurses to open down on it. So that is the difference between how they fought in medieval times and how we fight in reenactment and why. Mostly it's to please you guys. Because if we fought the way they did in medieval times, you go, oh, it's really boring. But also, it's for entertainment, and also because people see a lot of Hollywood films, there's a certain expectation of what they're going to see. So we try and give you a fairly accurate representation of what they did, along with trying to entertain them as well. We'll handle that.
Done the historical stuff. Apparently we had, is it Richard Beaumont?
Richard Beaumont,
Here last year, who does all the stunt fighting in a lot of the films. in Hollywood at the moment. I was going to talk about how reenactment fighting is different from stage fighting and film fighting. And Cliff mentioned about the choreography previous, and also about the way that we learn the shots that we make and the angles that we make. When we let a new member into our society, we train from scratch. We teach them in a very martial arts sort of manner. We do have them all lined up, and we have them learning the different moves over and over again. And it's a set sequence. Once they've learned the attacks and the blocks, then we'll start to throw in random shots. So it'll be shots that they know, so ones that they know how to block against, but it could be a head blow moving down to a leg blow moving up to an arm shot. And then we call that freestyle. The reason we do freestyle is that it's, funnily enough, safer. People think, well, in choreography, surely that's safer because you know where the shots are coming from, you know the exact move that's coming next. But in the past, we've had reason to sort of see that this is actually quite dangerous. We had some friends who were doing a show a while back, and they sorted out this beautifully choreographed fight. There was lots of backflips and punches, and they'd done this over and over and over again. And the shot came in, the guy with the mail in it came in, punched the guy in the face. Because he saw it coming, he rolled with it, so it looked like he connected, but he didn't. So it's all set up. Punch comes in at the last minute. Our friend sees a pretty girl in the audience, does that. As he comes back, the fist is there. He's now on the floor. Now I was completely oblivious to this. He gets up, blood pouring out of his face, blood pouring out of his mouth, and I'm like, ooh, blood capsules, this is brilliant. And then later on, somebody said to me, is your colleague okay? And I'm like, yeah, it was on the show fight. He said, no, my love, he's crying in the ambulance down there. So what had happened was he cut his face open and he lost part of his tooth as well. And that was because it was perfectly choreographed. You knew what shot was coming next. But on that day, because he got distracted, he wasn't ready for that shot. So we do freestyle, so it's all random. You do see a few little choreographed pieces in our shows, like in the middle, maybe somebody will hit someone with a shield and knock a sword out of hand. And we kind of know that's coming in the sequence. But everything else apart from that is freestyle. So you're ready for anything, to be honest. If you're trained to block all of the different shots that we show at you, then no matter what sequence they come in the show fights, then hopefully you will block quite a high percentage of them. And it is actually safer because you are expecting the unexpected. Obviously for films, they can't do that. You can't have someone like, I don't know, Viggo Mortensen out there, and someone's flailing at him like a lunatic with a sword. You know, and he doesn't know what's coming next because this man's worth millions. And you can't have your actor off. If you're sort of doing filming for sort of, I don't know, how long did Lord of the Rings take to film it all? 3, 4, 5 years? How many? 6? You can't have him off sort of indefinitely because he's got a broken arm or he's got a skull. So obviously they've got to learn the choreographed fights. They have to know where the next shot's coming from. And also it was good on camera as well. I mean, you can't have someone going out there sort of swinging and then all of a sudden people are blocking because they can't block it. So that's why they do most of the choreography in the films, because it needs to be done for the safety of the actors and also it looks good on film. But obviously for us it doesn't work. Moving on to sort of film work, we found that quite difficult in the past, haven't we? I was going to talk about ROPS as well, wasn't I? Yeah. The other difference between stage fighting and reenactment fighting, we had an actor come to us. He was in a lot of Shakespearean theatre, and he's actually the chap from Hot Wheel adverts at the moment with a high-pitched voice. Called Ross, he's very lovely. And he wasn't actually trained to lay a blade on the body, because a lot of the Shakespearean theatre acting is you feign into the body all the time, but there's a lot of deflecting going on. And they also do use sharps. Because apparently he cut, was it Joseph Fiennes' face open with a sharp because he got it a bit too close. So there is a lot of that going on. So what we had to teach him, and he was all very good with the footwork, and he was good learning the actual routines as such, and learning the muscle memory, but he wouldn't actually lay a blade on the person. So he'd come in and he'd stop, and he'd be like, well, hit me. He's like, no, I don't like touching people with blades. It's not the way we talk. It's like, that's the way we do it. We're wearing full plate. Hit us, and if you hit us, hammer us. Because if you see a shot going in and it's going to go somewhere safe, then you really hit them with the arm. That's the other difference between obviously our fighting and film fighting. Yes, again, you can't hurt your fellow actor by hitting them really hard. So apparently even Mortensen used to bruise people up quite bad, and some of the senior actors apparently used to hit them quite hard as well. Was it Kevin Smith who played Ares? Apparently if he whacked you, you really felt it and you come away with bruises. Filming, we've done quite a bit for the BBC. We did Battlefield. And that was awful in itself. People think, oh, you know, working for the TV is brilliant. The difference between us and the TV stars is that when they have armour, they normally have fiberglass, or they have aluminium, or plastic. What we've got, like my husband said, is you can have up to 7 stone of armour, maybe more, the more you add. I mean, that's like a stone in itself on your head. But they don't tend to take that into account. So they've got their actors there in all their armour, and those actors can stay in that armour all day, because they don't necessarily get hot in it, and it's not actually that heavy. But we're expected to stand the same amount of time in this. And we're a bit of a novelty, they don't seem to know what to do with us. They'll be sort of like, hold that pose, and you're there for ages thinking the sword's getting really heavy. They say, excuse me, but you know, the sword's like 3 pounds in weight. Oh, right, we're sorry. Or they'll say, that was a really, really good fight you did for us, but we want to film it for another angle now, so can you do it again? So you're hammering the hell out of each other for 3 minutes, putting on a really good fight display, and they want you to do it again, and then again, and again, and again, and again. You're in 7 stone of armour, with a 3 pound sword, and it's hot. And they're just demanding all the time. That's where it's very difficult. Whereas with the film actors and with the stuntmen and the extras like that, they'll have the fiberglass or the plastic or the aluminium, so they can actually do that. Apparently the stuntmen in Ivanhoe complained that the medieval helmets were too authentic and they couldn't see out them properly. Could they have the gaps made bigger, please? I was sort of like, okay. And also another story from the Ivanhoe set was a few of our colleagues went off and they were told that their costumes were too good, and could they take them off because they were showing the actors off? And could they wear the BBC version that they'd made, which was sort of something pretty string mail and satin and sort of crushed velvet and all the rest of it. Also the detectives episode, the fur coat, no knickers. Apparently they didn't know what to do with the reenactors either, and after about 3 hours of being in the blazing sun, they had to say to them, excuse me, can we have some water? Well, no, you have to wait until we break for lunch. No, we need some water. Why do you want water? Hello, because we're in 7 stone of armour and in the blazing heat, and you've got us running backwards and forwards like nobody's business. And they're like, oh, all right, yeah, we didn't think of that. In the meantime, sir, could you take that male shirt off again, which weighs 11 stone, take it off over your head, and so we can film it. And, oh, can you put it back on again? We can take it off again. And a friend of ours actually asked about 6 times to take this male shirt off, on and off. And after a while, you just can't lift it, and it grazed all the skin off the front of his face. And they just don't know what to do with us, because we're a bit of a novelty, we're a bit mad as far as they're concerned. So we're quite happy to put all this on and run around and hit each other. But the BBC are quite nice to work for them, because they do amazing food. And it's all free, and they pay you quite well. So when we did the Battlefield Britain, we were actually dragged up to Wales in the middle of October, November time. Taken 5 o'clock in the morning, we were expected to get there when the sun was just coming up, we got fed. It started to rain, and they had us running around this field in all our armour, making us lie down in the grass while it poured down on us. You know, and then well, we're a bit cold, can we have a cup of tea? It's like, well, we're not breaking yet. It's like, no, we're really cold, can we have a cup of tea, please? And they're just like, oh, yeah, all right, have a cup of tea, but can you do that over and over and over and over again? So they didn't really know what to do with us. And then I think the final scene was, well, we want you all to follow that cart, because what we're going to do is we're going to show how they used to put the armour in the back of the cart, and then the knights would sort of trudge behind the cart. Well, they had this cart going at God knows what speed. We're all in full plate trying to get on this cart in the hills like that. And it's the end of the day. They've had us running around all day in the armour, and sort of like expecting us just to get on with it and not complain, because if they were paying us well, apparently, so there was no excuse to moan. And they're just like, well, can you keep up? Excuse me, you at the end, can you keep up, please? Can you hurry up? Or like, well, can you slow down a bit? Well, no, we can. And they're dragging us up this hill, so we have to put up with quite a bit of rubbish, to be honest. I can say they are novelty. They don't understand that we're not in the Lord of the Rings armour, which is like the plastic legs, and we're not sort of in the fiberglass armour like in the Knight's Tale, which is beautiful armour, but still you can be in it for 10 hours during the day. there's a run around in it, and you know, there was no hassle, but obviously we can't do the same. Have I forgotten anything?
Right.
Because I think we're...
I think my endearing memory of that film shoot was watching Helen come out of a tent having been made up to look like she caught a axe in the face.
Oh yeah, makeup was fun.
That was quite cool.
Bloody well, didn't they put hats on you?
And they took several shots of you cutting my throat because apparently you looked like you were enjoying it.
Apparently you've got about 5 minutes for questions.
Oh, there's a question.
Any questions?
Go on, you know you want to. There.
All right.
Have we made them a bit scared?
Do people want to come and have a closer look at the armour maybe?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Come and maybe feel
Well, I
something?
don't know, if they ask one question, we might let them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go on, ask a
So
silly
you're
question.
talking about, I mean, maybe I just missed the beginning anyway, and so maybe this question is anyway. But why, I mean, why do you have it in authentic materials?
Yeah.
Basically, we work for English Heritage, and we do a lot of shows for English Heritage, and to actually have them invite you into their castles, they like authenticity.
Oh, right.
They actually say, obviously, if you turn up with sort of string mail, plastic armour, they'd say, out. You know, if we're historical entertainers, that's the sort of label they put on us, because we can't do living history, because for living history, the women wouldn't be allowed to wear the armour, and we have what, 4 or 5 female fighters in our group.
I ain't telling them they can't wear armour.
No, we're a bit scared. Basically, they say that we can wear armour as long as we take on a male persona. But if we were living history, then we'd have to wear porn dresses. Because suddenly people know we're getting porn dresses. So yeah, we work for English Heritage. They like it to be.
I just wondered, you're talking about when you're doing stuff at the BBC, and they ask you to do all these different shots. Maybe you could wear something that looked the same, but it's lighter.
It's pride for us.
I think pride is a really actor as
Yeah,
well.
just
Yeah. I think also, for a child, if you say to a child, you know, knights used to wear big, like balaclavas of metal, and they were really heavy. And they go, oh yeah, that's right. But if you felt this, anyone else felt this?
I think I passed it around.
Everyone? If you go up to a child and say, that's what a knight would wear, that, when they pick it up, I mean, normally what they do on purpose, we'll go up and say, that's what a knight would wear, come with that. And you see them then straight down there.
A few
That would be
of them
more
discovered
than
that.
a chapter in a book and it will stay in their minds forever. And it's teaching them about their heritage.
Very good way of mobilising and dealing with an overactive strepless child.
Absolutely.
Wear
Yeah.
this.
No, they put it all on and then they run off with it. You're like, oh, excuse me. Coming back. And then the monster's got to have it running off with it.
And I also think, you know, by what we're doing is, and I don't decry or say that people who live in this country from other heritage shouldn't celebrate their own heritage, but I think, especially in this country, we're losing our own heritage, and that the more we can promote who we are and where we came from, it's a good thing. We've got a lot to be proud of. We get a lot of nasty things as English people, but what we do is, especially with history, is we look at history through our modern eyes. And we'll say that weren't medieval knights very brutal? Wasn't the King of England a very brutal man? No, he was no more brutal or soft or harder than anyone else in his time. And you've got to take it in context of in his time. So to say that to beat a child, as one of the Flossard, who was Queen Philippa's secretary, give us a lot of documentary information on how people lived. But he was talking about thrashing a squire who decided that he wanted to stop fighting while practicing. That may seem terribly cruel to us today. A small child who's fighting with real weapons suddenly catches one off shot and hurts himself quite badly. So the master of arms then comes in with a willow switch and starts beating him until he starts fighting again. That may seem awfully cruel. But in their time, if you're in the middle of a battle and you suddenly catch a wound, you can't suddenly stop and say, oh, that really hurts. Because you'll lose your life. So what the master of arms was teaching was something that would one day perhaps save lives. Yep. If you want to come up and have a look at some of the weapons, feel free.
I think you want to
please
close
do.
now.
We're going to have a 10-15 minutes and then we'll do the closing ceremony. So you'll have...
Very eating is funny.
Oh, and Barry eating is funny.
Yeah.
Bring a bucket in a bib.
Then quick 5-10 minutes, have a look at the armour, and then grab a drink and come back.